Okay, hello and welcome to this video in the Ecosystems and Environment series, Biodiversity series for GCSE Biology. Before we start, I just want to clear up a little glasses inconsistency you might be noticing in this playlist. I'm actually recording these videos while running back and forth to our lateral flow testing centre, and obviously if you were in full PPE wearing glasses, they steam up. So if I've not got my glasses on, it's because I've just come back from lateral flow testing and I'm wearing contact lenses, which is the case to now. I've never used so much hand gel in a single hour in my life, I think. Okay, so moving on, maintaining biodiversity. I think this is a really important topic, right? Absolutely massively important. It essentially is one of the great threats that's affecting humanity. And I know I was saying that a lot in this series, but this really is. It's on a level with climate change in terms of diversity loss, okay? We are currently living through a mass extinction. And I say this from first-hand experience because you've seen some pictures there from Cuba. These are some pictures from Madagascar that you can see here. That's Ecuador, the Amazon rainforest, right, where I went a little bit native. That's the Galapagos Islands, and that's my most recent expedition to the Nateo Peninsula in Fiji. So as well as looking at all the data and reading about this and hearing about this in the same way in documentaries as everybody else, I've actually visited a lot of these places, these biodiversity hotspots around the world, and I've seen firsthand just how much stuff we are losing, okay? Well, and it is absolutely a travesty, okay? So the maintaining biodiversity bit of syllabus looks like this. Students should be able to describe both the positive and negative interactions in an ecosystem and explain their impact on biodiversity. And obviously students and concerned citizens have to be put in place programs to reduce the negative effects of humans on ecosystems and biodiversity. That is basically conservation. And then we've got a bunch of examples there that we can go through shortly. So firstly, let's start with the definition. What do we mean by biodiversity? Well, biodiversity is literally just what is the diversity of the living things on a planet. If you've got basically a field of corn, that is not very biodiverse. You've got one species, it's all corn, there it is. If you've got a rainforest, you've maybe got thousands and thousands of species. That's far more biodiversity, and that is good. Now I don't just say that as an assumption because, you know, they look pretty and you can make lots of, they keep David Attenborough in work. It's about stability. If the environment changes and your one species is not well adapted to that environment, then it's likely that your place is going to become a desert. If you've got high biodiversity, something at least will have the ability to survive whatever the environment does. That is stability and that is resilience. Also, most of our pharmaceuticals and important molecules come from the natural world, right? Obviously, there are no better biochemists than the organisms on the planet that live already. And we harness all sorts of different things from the natural world to make everything from pharmaceuticals to various building materials to all sorts of different things. And we don't know what's out there. We haven't catalogued everything yet. So we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot if we're destroying nature without actually fully understanding what's there. There is, of course, what I think is a very ethical point here, which is what gives this generation, this tiny little subset of human history, and this even tinier subset of global history, the right to go destroying everything so that future generations get no opportunity. Now, if you are thinking that's a bit of a hippie thing and you're not you know, really convinced by that line of reasoning and, you know, it's ecosystem progress or economics, all that kind of stuff, then I really think you haven't really been paying attention, right? But if you want to frame it in that, in those ones, there is this thing called ecosystem services, which measure and put a monetary value on why biodiversity is important and why our interactions with the environment are so key, right? And it basically goes like this. An ecosystem service is things that the environment does for us for free that are either impossible for us to do or expensive for us to do. So I'll give you some examples. Carbon storage, taking CO2, taking carbon out of the atmosphere so that our planet remains habitable. There is no better way to do that than with trees, right? Literally with plants. Okay, that is an ecosystem service. It's easy, it's quick, and it works. Pest control. Lots of natural predators have been keeping pests under control in agricultural areas for ages. Oxygen creation. Okay, the very air that we breathe is not something we can replace artificially, industrially, so on and so forth. Trees do it for free, plants do it for free, algae does it for free. Land fertility. If we have to use things like the harbour process and chemical processes to make our lands fertile, right, then obviously that is a huge cost and it degrades the quality of the land. Nature will make our land fertile for free if we work with it, not against it, okay? Flood prevention. right? You have seen in the climate change video previously all the ways that we're having lots of floods because we're building on floodplains. We're chopping down forests that are brilliant at capturing water and so on and so forth. Pollination, bees pollinate our food. Without pollinating insects, the amount of food on the shelves in the supermarket will plummet. There's lots of that on the internet you can look at. There's some famous pictures that do the rounds on social media all the time. Food production itself relies on nature. We eat other living things, of course. Building materials, timber comes from trees, of course. Recreation, so the whole environment for us to be a leisure environment, in terms of national parks, in terms of outdoor activities, all this kind of stuff is massively important, and therefore physical and mental health support. Okay, if we want to get out and keep healthy, which the COVID pandemic has taught us we should, if you've got a bit of countryside on your doorstep, you are in a much better position than if you're slap bang in the middle of a city. Okay, transport as well. The natural environment provides us with transport, things like rivers, right, things like the sea, so on and so forth. So I like this this little meme here, right? Imagine if trees gave off Wi-Fi signals, right? We would be planting so many trees, we'd probably save the planet too. It's too bad they only produce the oxygen we need to breathe. I think that is true. But I think if you're looking at this in terms of ecosystem services, you're looking at it in the wrong way. But just to keep the cold hard capitalists happy, let's look at this study from the London School of Economics, right? In terms of values. Here's a couple of things. So pollination in the UK has been valued at £430 million per annum. So this is part of a £17 billion pound boost, right, that we get in terms of our ecosystem services from the ecosystems on our land. Water quality, right, £1.5 billion. We couldn't purify water as effectively as nature can. Okay, the amenity value of all wetland types and everything that wetlands do for us is around 1.3 billion pounds. Renewable fuels, right, basically 3% of the energy demand and 7% of electricity generation. That is a large and growing. If you put a pound value on that, that is very, very large, and that is growing. Marine-based biotic raw materials, £95 million. UK aggregates, which are building materials, £4.8 billion. The environment generating substantial educational benefits, of course. Net carbon sequestered currently by the UK woodlands is £680 million a year. The cost of flood defences, right, the cost of flooding to us at the moment is about 1.4 billion pounds, 3.2 billion in extreme years, and this report was written before some of the extreme years we've had in recent years. Environmental services go some way to mitigate that. But as I say, if you're looking at this purely in money terms, I feel you've missed the point. This is more important than money, right? This is outside economics. Money is a human invented thing that we use to place value on stuff, and we choose what's valuable, right? And if the environment that keeps us alive and allows us to live happily and comfortably isn't worth more than money, then I don't know what is. So in terms of biodiversity loss, the big killers kind of go as follows. Over-exploitation is a massive, massive killer. So this is obviously much bigger than climate change. So if we look up here, the biggest killer, right, and this is from this study here that you can see published in Nature, right, is basically over-exploitation of land. You might think it's climate change, unless that is massively important, but climate change and biodiversity loss are two problems that have somewhat different drivers. Yes, they're overlapping, yes, they're linking, but it's over-exploitation of land. It's more the human population. And really, this study found that to prevent species extinction, you need a minimum of 10% of all habitats protected in every single country. We don't have anywhere near that yet, okay? As you can see, after over-exploitation, you've got agricultural activity, urban development, invasion of diseases, so on and so forth, and climate change at the end, okay? So apologies if you can hear the noise of a mower outside the science shack. There's obviously someone trying to cut down some plants and keep that carbon sequestered somewhere out of the atmosphere, I hope. So let's just do some examples straight off the syllabus. These are some of the things that people have done to maintain biodiversity, i.e. conservation. So the top one there, protecting and regenerating breeding programs rather for endangered species. So this is the North American wolf, okay, and reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park is a into North America, into the USA, is a massive conservation success. It moved rivers, right? Wolves moved the rivers. they had that much of a dramatic effect on the environment. And if you don't believe me, go and look into that example or have a look at one of the videos on Canada in the Conservation Conversations playlist. Right, we've also got then the next one, protected and regeneration of rare habits. Now, of course, this was the last act of President Obama before he stopped being president, and I think we should all just pretend that the 4 years after that just were some kind of weird blip and didn't happen. It's some kind of obscure farce. But he protected this massive area, right, around Hawaii, which is now one of the world's largest marine protected zone. That's a way of doing conservation. Reintroduction of field margins in the UK to stop runoff, sea eutrophication from previous lessons. Obviously that's now law in this country and across Europe. We've got here sort of protection of reducing deforestation, and this is a win from early this year, which is that Nigeria has decided not to put a superhighway through primary rainforest. They've managed to stop that project, which is very good news from just a month ago, and of course much more recycling. See previous lesson on that. Okay, now really I can't predict what you're going to get on an exam, but I can give you some case studies, and this for me is a particularly important one because this is home. Okay, this is where I grew up. This is my ancestral land, if you like. This is why I guess I'm so into all the nature stuff and the conservation stuff, because I grew up in a national park. I grew up in a forest. Okay, I'm much more comfortable there than I am in a city, for example. Right, so the New Forest has been a effectively sort of managed area since about 1066 when William the Conqueror turned up. He wanted it as a hunting ground, but the effect of that was there were lots of rules on how much livestock could be there, how much exploitation could be there, and that kind of stuff. Okay, as a result, there is a tradition called the drift, right, where you are, if you live there and you're what's called a commoner and you have commoner's rights, you can release a certain amount of livestock onto the forest to graze it, keep it in control, and then you have to round them up every sort of August bank holiday, count them, and if the forest is being overgrazed, you've got to take some of the, particularly the male young colts, off the forest, okay, and if it's being undergrazed and there's too much woody growth that animals can't feed on, then you release more out onto the forest. Now that is conservation. You wouldn't think of the New Forest as being a conserved environment for 1,000 years, but it is, right? That is a conservation strategy. Okay, obviously it's one in a developed, wealthy country, which was established by William the Conqueror in 1066, and the councils he established, the so-called adjusters and verderers, still run all this stuff within the New Forest. Amazing thing. Another conservation method here, because acorns are poisonous to ponies, you get certain times of year when in the autumn, where the acorns are falling, you get pigs released onto the New Forest, they're called pannage, to go around and eat all the acorns. Okay, that is a conservation method. Okay, that is a method of managing the environment to promote biodiversity, try and keep everything in balance. Okay, obviously they do also try and annoy the tourists as well, but as a local there I just kind of snigger when I see that kind of stuff. This is gorse. Now gorse is an incredibly important species. It's a habitat for lots of biodiversity, but only when it's probably young is it's grazable by herbivores. When it gets big, it gets woody, it gets sort of shady, you can't really get into it, graze on the inside, the biodiversity kind of drops. So actually there are controlled burns on the New Forest, which is a conservation method which is supposed to regenerate growth, right, new growth of fresh young shoots that the ponies can eat and things can graze on. Now this was my upbringing. This is basically normal to me, right? This kind of management of the environment around you, and it is a form of conservation. It's a positive interaction between humans and the environment, okay, in terms of maintaining the New Forest as a high biodiversity environment, because if left to its own devices, it would all become ancient woodland, right? It would all become sort of primary woodland, which is fantastic, right, as an environment, but it's not as biodiverse as having a patchwork. Okay, so anyway, incentives and causes. Let's go to another example. So that's sort of the UK, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, very old protection methods. Let's go all the way back to the other side of the spectrum here, where we're going to talk about maybe more of the developing part of the world, the poorer parts of the world. So why do people damage their environments? Well, it's not because they want to. Anywhere you go in the world, and I will tell you this from first-hand experience, people feel very passionate about their environment, about their slice of the world, right? They want to protect it, but often they don't have the choice, okay? Drivers of damage to the environment, poverty, desperation, lack of education, lack of opportunity, and of course unscrupulous countries, usually external actors, big business, moving in and exploiting resources to then take away some product, okay? So if we have a little look at this, how do we effectively protect environments? Do we turn up to the locals as the outsider and say, no, you must not chop this down, and I'm going to make you do this by some kind of law enforcement method. I'm going to get batons and a gun or something like that and just try and defend things? Evidence suggests that just doesn't work. I mean, the last few rhinos on the planet of certain subspecies are being guarded 24/7, and people still try to poach them because there is a demand for rhino horn. Okay, and it's that demand that needs to be addressed. Okay, so basically, if you stop people wanting to damage their environment, you stop people needing to damage their environment, you give them other opportunities, then that's the way forward. And the way you do that is you provide educational opportunities, you provide employment opportunities, okay? You raise wealth, right? Or you equally distribute wealth. And particularly, as I've said before in this series, you empower the women. Because if you've got a society where women don't have reproductive choice, they don't have economic choice, they don't have career choice and educational choices, you've halved instantly the number of high-earning lawyers, doctors, engineers, inventors, business people that you've got. You're literally working with half your economic population, right? If you empower women the same as men, then you've got double the economic might to change things for the better. Okay, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that? Okay, so on that note, I want to introduce you to Ikala STEM. Look up this organisation. They're a group in Madagascar who basically, through mentorship and partnerships, empower Malagasy women into careers in science, technology, engineering and medicine, which is an incredible aim and incredible objective to do. So really, really incredible group. Okay, a good friend of mine in Madagascar, who you can see in the Conservation Conversation series, is involved with these guys, supporting wherever he can. Okay, so there's other incentives that have happened. Red carbon credits, paying countries not to chop down their forests by paying them for the carbon stored in the trees. Ecotourism, which I've been involved in quite a lot. So if we, as Western wealthy tourists, travel in an ecologically responsible way, then that can bring money in a positive way into communities and so on and so forth. Land purchases and nature reserves, but who's going to enforce it? That's the question. Okay, I could go on about that for ages, but let's go on to our last case study here. So in terms of Madagascar, it's a very different thing to the New Forest, but it is still an area where there is conservation, but it's far more urgent, far more scrambled and not as long established. Now, Madagascar is a biodiversity hotspot. It's amazing. You've got the lemurs. We all think of it as looking like this, and to an extent it does. Okay, what's amazing about Madagascar is its endemism, high levels of endemism. More than 600 new plants and animals were discovered in Madagascar between 1999 and 2010. Many of them were already in danger of extinction, and that's the World Wildlife Federation in sort of 2011. Okay, which is so you're just discovering species and they're already endangered. Okay, so let me give you an example of that. Of course, that was a picture I took when we arrived on our camp in Madagascar in 2012, and the lemurs literally are right there. Okay, it's not like nature documentaries. If you go to the right places, you get the impression with nature documentaries they have to trek through the forest for ages to find these things. If you go to the right spots in Madagascar, the nature is in your face. It's right there. Okay, obviously to get there you've got to do a bit of walking. So here's some of my students walking down the path towards the area, which basically was mostly a river. That's a fruit called a makutra. I'd never heard of or had before, but it's absolutely delicious. We've got different species of reptile that are there that you would never have found anywhere else. And of course, this here was a brand new species to the area that had never been discovered before, which we found on one of our surveys. And that obviously is a highlight for me, being present for the discovery of a new species. It was the first one on that side of Madagascar of this particular species of lizard that had been discovered, and only the second one on the planet that had been discovered. And already that environment was threatened. Okay, but unfortunately, the reality of Madagascar is that about over 90% of it looks like this. It's already been deforested. It's already been destroyed, okay, for the reasons I talk about. Okay, most people live in rural areas, live in poverty, there's poor governance, and there's lack of opportunity. Okay, so the effect of that as well is that the very fertile soil that made Madagascar what it is runs into the rivers, right, and runs out into the Straits of Mozambique. And if you look at satellite imagery of Madagascar, you can actually see that often with the caption, "Madagascar is bleeding," as this red soil-rich water runs into the sea. Okay, very, very sad. Okay, so that unfortunately is the case. Now we know how to fix it, but it involves better wealth distribution and less of an obsession on things in the economic field. But that obviously goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. So in terms of biodiversity, it's not a pretty picture at the moment. We are living through what's being called the 6th mass extinction. And as an example, this here is the range as was, historic range of lions, and then the orange represents where they can be found now. Okay, that obviously is it's been absolutely destroyed. Okay, over 90% reduction of the lion's range. Okay, and we use the lion because it's a symbol of conservation and so on and so forth. Okay, which is absolutely terrible. This sixth mass extinction, that's not my term. That's a term that's been used widely, including by the UN. So nature's dangerous decline, unprecedented species extinction. I want to read you some of these quotes from the bottom here, right? Which is the current global response is entirely insufficient, right? We need transformative changes, right, to restore them. The bottom line, if you can see there, over 1 million species are threatened by extinction, and then we've got most comprehensive assessment of its kind, and its opposition from vested interests can be overcome for the public good. And that opposition for vested interests is what I find so offensive, that because some people are getting rich, they're willing to look the other way. Okay, and that is utterly morally reprehensible, right? We need to protect this for all the reasons that I've talked about. But let's end on something positive. Let's end on a positive note here. Look, what does good conservation look like? And these are some of my friends who I've kept in touch with from Madagascar. That's Armand, and at the bottom there is Henri. So what does conservation look like? It looks like engagement, it looks like empowerment, it looks like funding, and it looks like giving people experience, taking people and showing them what is going on. And it involves education. And this is why I do this job, and this is why I'm doing these videos for you, because I believe this is crucially important. If I can introduce you to the organisation that I've done this with, who you might want to look up, they're an organisation called Operation Wallacea. Tagline there is conservation research through academic partnerships. All those pictures at the beginning, and most of the ones in this presentation I've taken on expedition with them. If you are interested and passionate about this area of research and this area of science, then do have a look at their website. I rate them very highly as an organisation. Okay, so that's us on biodiversity, right? We're going to take a little bit of a different tack in the next video and start talking about food, but there's plenty in there to think about, and hopefully you feel more equipped to answer those questions in an exam. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.